Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Blakeman Presents Fun with Robotics. Don't forget to check out the website, theroboticscodedepot.com. There's lots of cool information about robots there. Today we're going to be talking about ways to store and organize different types of sandpapers. There's lots of different types of sandpapers out there, but I mainly use 5 different types. So I built my cart to store and organize those particular 5 types of sandpapers. And those are your standard size sandpaper sheet, a 3-inch wide belt that's used on a belt sander, like that, what they call a mouse pad sander, used on a vibratory sander. And this is great for getting into tight spots with the pointy end. And a random orbit pad used on a random orbit sander. It just sticks on there. Great for not leaving any directional marks on the surface that you're sanding. And finally, a long thin 1-inch belt used for a tabletop sander. So let's have a look at the cart. So here is the sandpaper cart. And on this front section is where I store the typical sandpaper sheets. These shelves are loose enough that they slide in and out if you have trouble getting to the sandpaper, because sometimes they do tend to stick to each other. But yeah, so you can just pull it out and grab what you want and then slide it back. Now, this unit in the front here is also a French cleat, so it actually is sitting on French cleats back here, and this can actually be popped out and put on a wall if I ever get any wall space. On the side here is where I store the sanding belts. I went with a horizontal storage mechanism, and it's really nothing more than 2 pieces of plywood with slits cut in it, and then they're just tight enough to hold it firmly that you can pop this out pretty easily. It's worked pretty well. I have a little bit of an issue down here. I'll talk about that later. But at the bottom of this one is just a bin where I store all of the used sandpaper that's really not quite done yet. Sometimes it's good to have a piece of sandpaper that's been used. It's not quite as aggressive as a brand new sheet, and it's nice just to be able to take some really fine bits off of whatever you're sanding and not really get too aggressive with it. On the back side is sort of the same as the front, but this is where I store the sanding pads for the vibratory sander and for the random orbit sander. And again, this is also a French cleat that would pop out and be able to be put on a wall. And then on the other side is where I store the wider belts for the handheld belt sander. And there's really not as many different grits for that. You're either talking super coarse down to reasonably fine. You don't get the super fine sanding belts that you do with a regular sheet of sandpaper. So I just went with bins to store these. It's pretty nice. You know, it's just the right size for the belt. It doesn't get them, doesn't squish them, and it's just enough because I don't have too many of them. So this seems to be a pretty good storage mechanism for the wider sanding belts. And then also on the front, I do have this sandpaper cutoff sheet, cutoff mechanism, where you can take a piece of sandpaper, just slide it in there. It has gradations along the top, so if you want a piece that's 5 inches, you just put it there and then tear it off and you've got a 5-inch sheet. So that works really pretty well. I do have a couple of issues with this that I think I'll probably take care of with this video. One of the things is I don't have these labeled. I don't have the different grits put on here. So I think what I'd like to do is have like a Brother P-Touch type label for each of the different grits, but it won't stick to the end of a piece of plywood. So I'm going to put some varnish on here, maybe some urethane, and get it nice and smooth so I can put those labels on here. Also on this side with the belt storage, which by the way is also a French cleat, which comes off and it just kind of sits on the side here. It's a little difficult, as I mentioned, to get to this. So I'm thinking of actually raising this up and also to add a little bit more storage, because I do have some extras of these belts that I'd like to store all together. Making the cut here a little deeper so that I can get 4 belts in each section. And maybe doing a color coding system so that I can tell where the different grits are. So let's do that, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the results. So here are the results of the upgrades that I did to the Sandpaper Cart. I think the most obvious thing that you'll see that's different is that I color coded the section here that stores the sanding belts. I also moved it up about 5 inches, and that allows me to get to this bin down here at the bottom that stores the used sandpaper a lot easier, even if there's belts stored all the way in the bottom section. I also increased the depth of these cuts that store the belts, and now I can get up to 5 belts per line, although the 5th one sticks out a little bit. I stuck with 4 here because it's enough for all the belts that I currently have. All my belts are now stored on here. I don't have any that are floating around and can get lost. So that worked out okay, just to have 4 in each row. Another thing that I did was to add a divider in this bin section here. On the left, I've got the typical pieces of used sandpaper, and on the right are the used sanding belts. I did that because the belts tended to get lost in the bottom, and they were, if you really wanted one, you had to go digging through all the used sandpaper to find them. So I decided to just make a divider there and keep them separate. And these are really good for if you're working on the lathe and you want to do a little bit of polishing or sanding of a part on the lathe. You can simply wrap it around the part while it's turning and put a little pressure on it like this, and it'll give you a nice even sanding of the part. So it's good to keep these around. Sometimes these belts break and they're still really fairly good. You can repair them, but it's nice just to have them around as a strip of sanding paper. On both the back and the front for these shelves, what I did was I put polyurethane. I think there was a total of 4 coats of polyurethane on the front, and sanded between each coat of polyurethane. And the problem with that is that you can't just paint the front surface of the shelf. No matter how careful you are, what happens is the polyurethane tends to wick up to the top and to the bottom, and you get this sort of gooey layer of polyurethane. So I didn't worry too much about it while I was putting the coats on the front. And then when it was all dry, I took the shelf out and I used a vibratory sander just to get rid of all that stuff on the top and on the bottom, which leaves a really nice, just smooth surface on the front that you can put a Brother P-Touch label on. I also decided, and this isn't really necessary, but some of these shelves were sticking a little bit, and I thought it'd be nice to be able to, actually pull them out when you're looking for sandpaper, almost like a drawer. It just makes it a little easier to get to the sandpaper that you need. So I took a dado and I made them just a little bit thinner on the edges here, and now they slide pretty nice. Some people might not like that. Maybe you want them stuck in there. If I ever decided that I didn't like this, I could just glue them in and they would stick in there solid. So then I started labeling all the different shelves with the grit numbers that were stored on that shelf. And it worked out really well. I think these labels are sticking nicely to the polyurethane surface. But I ran out of the Brother P-Touch label material, and that stuff is ridiculously expensive. They wanted, at Walmart, they wanted $10 for one little cartridge of this stuff. So I was able to find a deal online for a 4-pack of them on Amazon for like 15 and change. So that makes it a little bit more reasonable. But I'm still waiting for them to come in. So maybe in a future video I'll do an update when I get all the labels on both these front shelves and on the back shelves for the sanding pads. Also, I was having a little bit of an issue with these front face covers. I don't know why I decided to do it, but I decided to tack them on with these little brass nails. It looked nice, but they were starting to come undone. If you grab this and to move it around, they were starting to come out. So I just decided I would go ahead and put some screws in there to hold them tight. This probably isn't the best material to have. Maybe a piece of plywood would have been better for this outer surface. But other than that, I think it has turned out really well. I'll come back, I'll do a couple of rough dimensions, and then we'll do the wrap-up. Okay, I forgot to mention one thing. I was thinking about what would happen if I were to need a new sanding tool, like for example a spindle sander, and it comes with a series of little sanding spindles. Where would I store them? Obviously I want to keep those sanding devices with all my other sanding stuff. So what would I do? Well, I thought about it and I realized that I could extend this by removing the top and the bottom, making wider tops and then another side panel, and then I would have room for more shelves or however I wanted to store that additional sanding device. And then I could just move the one set of casters out to the end and I'd be good to go. So it is expandable for different types of sanding devices in the future. Okay, so let me just give you a few rough dimensions. The total height of this is 49.5. That includes the bottom piece of plywood and the top piece of plywood. The width is, it's like 14.1/8. That does not include these side-mounted French cleats for the sanding belts and the smaller sanding belts. The depth is 20 inches. And the space between these shelves is about from center to center, it's about 2 1/4. And on the back side, probably the same, center to center, 2 1/4. And the width of these, let's say the inside width is 5 1/4, and the shelf width is 5 1/2. Well, that's a wrap for episode 3 of Fun with Robotics. If you have any questions about this week's build of the Sandpaper Organization Cart, send an email to info@theroboticscodedepot.com and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. And don't forget to check out the website. All the latest videos for this channel will be posted there under the YouTube menu item. Stay tuned for next time when we build an organization cart for circular saw blades and bandsaw blades.